This is a shir on Likutei Sichos Chelek Tes Vav Vayetze the fourth Vayetze Dalet. Der Heintige said that in this week's parsha it's told with the lengthiness how Yaakov Avinu, while he was in the house of Lavan, was particularly occupied with tzoin, with sheep, both in the context of the fact that his work there was to be a shepherd, and also in the reward, the payment that Lavan gave him at the end was with sheep. So for the first 14 years he worked as by virtue of the fact that he got Leah and then Rachel, and then when it came time for him to make something for his own house, Lavan paid him in sheep. So he worked with sheep the whole time and he was paid with sheep. Similarly, which means basically that his main wealth was sheep, and it was his main possessions, and from that he became an usher, became wealthy. As the pasuk testifies, Vayifrei tzaish ma'id ma'id, the man became expansively wealthy. Vayiloi tzaynu rabbis, and he had many sheep. And then the pasuk continues, and he had maidservants and servants and camels and donkeys. And as the Rebbe points out in the brackets, the sheep enabled him to be able to have the other possessions, servants and other animals. As Rashi explains, he would sell his sheep for high value, and buy all these other items. But his main agenda, his main item, the thing he had, was sheep. And he would sell his sheep and buy other things. However, we find in Parshas Vayishlach a little bit of a deviation from this. When Yaakov sends the shlichus, the messengers to Esav, and there he describes what he has. So Yaakov says the message like this: I went to Lavan, and then Vayihili, I now have Shoir, Vachamoir, oxen and donkeys, Tzoin, sheep, Ve'eved V'shivcha, and servants and maidservants. So we find that sheep is only third in the list of items that he says he has, after oxen and donkeys. And when in reality, till now we've been understanding that Yaakov's main possession is sheep. Especially that just before that it says that when Yaakov was running away, which is not long before he meets Esav, it says that he took all of his cattle, in other words, all of his sheep, his flocks of sheep, and then he said he took all the other possessions he had. Miknei Kinyonoi, which is, those are mentioned after his miknei, his herds of cattle. What is Miknei Kinyonoi? The Rabbi points out from Rashi that the things he had bought with Kinyonoi, with the possessions that he had, his main possession was sheep. The things that he had bought after selling sheep was other things. So that's when he's running away from Lavan. Not long thereafter, when he's going to Esav, the message he sends is that I have oxen and donkeys and sheep. Sheep is, we know, the main thing you have. So why, in identification to Esav, do you downplay the sheep? Base. Why are we involved in such details about the sheep and the way the sheep are mentioned? The Rebbe says every Indian in Torah is, as the word Torah means, a hira, a teaching. It's an everlasting teaching for every Jew in every place and in every situation. Especially the stories that are told about our forefathers, Maaseh Avos. Those stories that are told in the Torah are definitely a lesson for all of us. Especially something that is occupying almost a whole seder. There's this whole seder talking about sheep. Sheep have got to be very important to us as well. The lesson has to be very relevant. It has to be a siman labanim. Maaseh Avos, what happened to the father's siman, is an indication and a signpost labanim to the children. It tells them how to live. Not just it tells them how to live, it also gives an asinaskech. It gives the ability to live with that message. Because we are, after all, the children of Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. So the power they give us enables us to live our lives here in the teaching they teach us. So we understand that these details are also very important for us to understand what they mean. Which details? First of all, that it was particularly sheep that brought Yaakov to his expansive wealth. Number two, even though sheep was the main thing, he bought other things by selling sheep. And 3, when it came to Esav, he highlighted not the sheep, but he highlighted the other items he had bought with the sheep, oxen and donkeys. So we're going to see, says the Rebbe, how this relates to the Avodah Ruchnis, the spiritual Avodah of every Yid. Gimel. So we'll first understand this by understanding what it says in the Medrash about the connection between Yidden with Hashem. The Medrash in Shir Hashirim, Rabbi says, Hu li la'av, he will be for me for a father, v'ani lo leben, and I am to him like a child. Hu li la'roya, he, Hashem, is to me like a shepherd, v'ani lo l'tzayin, and I am to him like sheep. So it's well known the question, since Jews are compared to children of the Eibishter of Hashem, what in the world is added by saying they're like sheep? What is the analogy of being like shepherd and sheep, the belovedness to Hashem like sheep? We have the belovedness to Hashem like children. How can you compare the belovedness of children to the belovedness of sheep? So the explanation is given exactly. That's the reason, because sheep are so not important and children are so important. That's exactly the reason why there's added value to the analogy of sheep. Was heißt? The fact that the Yidden are called children, this shows that they have a entity, that they have an existence in the mind of the Father, in this case Hashem. And even though the connection with an neshama to Hashem, so it's not like a child down below who becomes a literally independent entity. Your child, after it's born, grows as an independent living being. The neshama always retains its oneness with Hashem, so it never really gets separate from Him. So it's a child who still remains in the oneness of the Father. However, the moment you say the word ben, child, it's already a sign, and it shows that it's like a second reality. It's not the Father. It's something separate of the Father. And the belovedness and endearment of the child to the Father is of some kind of it means that the child is teifes makim. He takes up space. In other words, he grabs the attention of the Father. Something to grab the attention of the Father. In other words, to say that something is existent, even in terms of its source, Hashem, this has to be talking about the source here of Hashem. We're talking about has to be the godly light of the order of Hishtalshlus, the order of descent. In other words, because the light of Hashem, right? We talk about Hashem, there's many different levels. When we talk about the level of Hashem, the way He pertains to creation of the world, there we can talk about the Yidden being like a ben, being like a child to Hashem. Because by definition, child and father means that the child is relevant to the Father. For something to be relevant to Hashem, you have to be talking about a level of Hashem where He has chosen that there should be relevance in His eyes, so to speak, from this world, or even from the spiritual neshama. However, when we talk at a higher level of godliness, higher than Ishtalshlus, higher than the chain of descent which was used to create the world, so about that we could employ the verse that says in Koheles, Gam bein va'ach ein lo, he has no child and he has no brother. In other words, there's nothing in Hashem's presence that you can say has any relationship to Him, has any existence outside of Him. A child, and the feeling of love you have to a child, is a separate existence that is relevant to you. So it's talking in reference to Hashem, a place, so to speak, a level of Hashem where the world has some kind of reference, some kind of relevance. However, when we're talking about a higher level, where there we say, no, there's no brother, there's no son, there's nothing in the face of Hashem. There's no existence that can withstand, so to speak, that can have an existence in that level of intensity of the revelation of Hashem. So they're compared to sheep. Because sheep, you're right, when it comes to a shepherd and sheep, his love to a sheep, it's not really, that they don't really grab relevance by him in terms of the feeling, the emotion of love. However, this also shows on the great virtue and advantage of the Jew, that even when we're talking about the level where nothing else exists, where, as we said, there's no brother, there's no child, but we are saying there's an endearment. There's an endearment to the Yidden, which would be expressed like the shepherd to the sheep. However, this endearment, this belovedness, is not because of their metzius, not because of their existence, their separate existence. We said this is a level of the Eibush we're talking about, where separate existence doesn't stand. On the contrary, because of their bittul, because of their non-existence in the presence of the Eibush, bittul, and it's dafka, particularly this bittul, which becomes a vehicle, which becomes a receptacle, which has the ability to accept within it the godly light that's higher than ishtalshlus. As it says in the pasuk, Morim b'kodesh eshken, where does Hashem in His most exalted and holy state rest, ve'esdaka shval ruach, with the downtrodden and the lowly of spirit. Lowliness of spirit is the activity of moving aside your existence. When you move aside your existence, that allows for the great level of Hashem to be revealed therein. So we're talking about, we can't talk, there's the level of Hashem where He relates to us like children. Then there's the level of Hashem where we don't even have any relevance on that level. But because we're so bottle, yes, the endearment is there, but it's an endearment like a shepherd to a sheep. In a way, it's higher. And this is also, this inyan, the oitzam bittul, the force of this bittul is alluded to the fact that Yidden are compared to sheep. As we see also the characteristics of sheep, by sheep there's the nature of bittul more than by other animals. Docile like a sheep. Other animals, they put up a ruckus, put up a fuss. Sheep are by nature more docile and more peaceful, more bittul-dik, less egoistic, so to speak, less personality. Bittul, they represent bittul. So when Yidden are called Tzoyin, representative bittul, that's where there can be this higher level of relationship with Hashem. So now, continues the Rebbe Neis Dalet, these two descriptions of Yidden, Ben as a son, a child, and Tzoyin as sheep, these also relate to us by teaching us two ways of serving Hashem. The way of serving Hashem in a way of child is the avodah of learning Torah. The main thing, the main agenda of learning Torah is the understanding that you have in your mind. And that process by default includes the fact that a person feels himself. His understanding has now perceived Torah. He's here and his intellect has understood Torah. Even though that to truly understand Torah and the truth of Torah, you need to first be in a state of bittul. Unlike other forms of intellect, the Torah can only truly be received in your mind if a person is bittul, if he's non-existent, so to speak. Dafka David of a nafshika of falakeltia, we say every day 3 times in davening, in the Lekeinetzer and the end of Shemon Esrei. My soul is like earth before everyone. In other words, I'm bottle. The continuation of that verse is Psach libi b'seirasecha, open my heart in your Torah, Hashem. In other words, bittul is a preparation for absorbing Torah, as we know in the concept of Baruch Hu b'Torah Tchila. That part of the important process of learning Torah is to make a bracha on the Torah, because by making a bracha you're submitting to Hashem that it's Hashem's Torah, and you are bottle in front of Hashem, and then you start to study. So the Rebbe says, but that bittul is only an introduction to the study. The actual study, the exercise of study is not with bittul. You need yourself to be here, you need your faculties to be here, you need your intellect to be here. Your mind needs to be at full, in full shape, best shape, to get with your seichel, with your intellect, what the Torah is saying. That's one service of Hashem, Ben, where your reality, your existence is a very important component. Then we have the other form of Avodas Hashem, which is referred to as Tzoyin, sheep. This is indicative of the Avodah of Birurim, going out to refine things. Tzoyin is from the root word Yitziah, going out. Going out of what? Going out of the 4 cubits of Torah. Going out to be there in the world, to engage in the world, to make the world a dwelling place for Hashem. And Dafka, this Avodah brings to the true bittul of a Yid. The true bittul of a Yid to the Eibishter is when he goes out of his own existence and own feelings, and own reality. So why is that by going out into the world? That would seem to be an enhanced giving over to yourself, going out there with a drive, with a career. No. He says because a Yid doesn't do it for himself. In brackets it says the Rebbe, because on the contrary, the mere fact that he occupies himself with the things of the world is a descent for him. The true Jew is his pnimius, is his ruchnius, his spirituality, right? And now you're telling him, you're involved in learning Torah, but you got to go out of learning Torah. But learning Torah is where I engage my deepest, my highest, my most spiritually attuned faculties to Hashem. Now you're making me leave that and go out to just do things in the world? Yeah, because the only way to fulfill Hashem's plan for the world is to go out there. So it's not about me. It's not about the Yid. Yid would prefer to stay in his pristine environment. Going out is a state of bittul. So tzoyin represents going out in the world and being bottle. Doing what Hashem wants, not what you would prefer to do spiritually. So now we'll understand the connection from sheep to the Avodah of Yaakov in the house of Lavan. The difference between the Avodah of Yaakov when he was with his father and the Avodah of Yaakov, the way he's described in our Parsha, in Parshas Vayetze, unlike Parshas Toldos, where he's still at home. In Parshas Toldos, we talk about Yaakov the way he is in the Avodah of son. We said son, child, is learning Torah. Yaakov ishtam yeshav yeholim. Yaakov was a wholesome person, complete in his relationship to Hashem, and he sat in the tents. Which tents? Oh, Leishal Shem, Leishal Ever, in the tents of Shem and Ever. And that was in the yeshiva. And also at the end of the Seder, where we say that he had to run away from his father's home. Where did he go? He went to the house of Ever. He went to the yeshiva for 14 years till he went to Lavan. Took a little detour. He learned Torah there. Only an hour, but that's the end of Parshas Toldos. In our Parshas Vayetze, when he went out, here we talk about the way Yaakov goes out of his 4 cubits of Torah, and he goes to Choron. Choron being a representative of Charoin Afshal Mokim Ba'elam, the place where Hashem's wrath, Hashem's anger is present, because there's negativity going on there. And he goes to the house of Lavan, the deceitful Lavan Ha'arami he's called. And there he's brought as a shepherd, literally a shepherd also. And also there he works, as it says, he works with all of his power, to the extent that we learn from Yaakov how a worker has to work for an employer. Employee has to work for an employer. Yaakov says, I worked with all my power. So it's dafka there, out there with the sheep, out there outside of the pristine environment of his father's home. Dafka, this Aveda, notwithstanding the great concealment, the great darkness of the house of Lavan, Yaakov doesn't become nispoil, he doesn't get affected. And he tells Esav, I lived with Lavan, Vitar, Yag, Mitzvah, Shamarti, I kept the 630 mitzvahs. And over there he marries and he has his 12 tribes. Mitose Shlema, and those tribes, unlike Avraham, Yitzchak, who each had a child who wasn't fully with the program, all of Yaakov's children are with the program. His so to speak, Mitosoi, his bed, in other words, his family, Shlema, is complete. This Avodah of being out there in Lavan's house brought out the perfect bittul, the consummate bittul of Yaakov. And we could say that's the inner reason, says the Rebbe, that the main rechush, main possessions of Yaakov, with what he worked with and what he took from the house of Lavan, was sheep. Because in sheep there is hidden an allegory for the spiritual advantage that he achieved through working in the house of Lavan. His work was all about bittul, sheep, doing what he was meant to do as destined by Hashem, even if it didn't match up to what he would prefer to do spiritually. And says the Rebbe here in square brackets, and this is also what it says in Vayifretz, the man became abundantly wealthy. The word Vayifretz is from the same expression as prayers, get it, knocking down, breaking through the barriers. Because through the Avodah of Bittul, Tzayin, sheep, which represents Bittul, you break down the barriers of Seder Shtalshlus, and you come to the level of the godly light, about which doesn't have any restrictions, about which it says, very, very much. Twice Ma'id means beyond Hishtalshlus, beyond restrictions, beyond Hishtalshlus. As we said, where does that come from? That comes from sheep. As still, Chassidus says that the words where it says, where Yaakov complains to his wives, that your father changed my payment 10 times, but every time it worked out for me. If he said that only the dotted sheep will be mine, They all became dotted. If he said only the ones that had black markings at their feet, became like that. It changed to anything it needed to change. So this was because of talking about Lavan doing something negative, changing the terms of contract. But Chassidus says there's something we can learn it in a beneficial way, based on the higher Sephiris, that Yaakov, through his service to Hashem, drew down the essence of the will of Hashem, which is higher than all kinds of descriptions and all kinds of limitations. And therefore, this reward could come down in any way possible. Because he was connected to a greater, deeper level of Hashem. Through what? Through his bittul, tzoyin. Now the Rebbe comes and tells us, in case you thought you're going to be a little placid, sheepish, shy kid, listen to this. The same way the Avodah of Ben. We talk about serving Hashem in the context of child, which requires entity, requires existence, because you need to have your own understanding. Same way that needs to be coupled together with the Avodah of Tzayin, Bittul. As we said, you can't really learn Torah if you haven't introduced it on a background of Bittul. Similarly, the other way around. The Avodah of Bittul of Tzayin also needs to have all the other buy-in of the other faculties of the soul. You need also your Metzias involved, your existence. On the contrary, with only lowliness and Bittul, you can't fight the concealment and the cover-up of the world. You need to have, as Shulchan Aruch says, you need to have also as kanam, to be bold like a leopard, giber kari, strong like a lion. In other words, you got to use this concept of boldness, which is, you have to be careful with it. Because as he points out in Or 35, don't get used to speaking boldly, chutzpahdik, because that may become who you are. You've got to be careful. But take that attribute and use the attributes of boldness, to be fearless and be not bashful, not to be bashful between people, in front of people who are cynical about what you're doing. And you have to use the gevura, the act of strength, which is metzias, to overpower your Yetzer Hara, to overpower him just like a strong person overpowers his enemy, to be victorious and to knock him down to the ground. Right? So you got to have metzias for that. As the Rebbe points out in R 37, there's also a verse in Divrei Yomim, Vayigba libay b'darkei Hashem. I think it's about David HaMelech, that his heart was uplifted in the ways of Hashem. In other words, the power and the force of kedusha, which makes him a credible force that needs to be reckoned with, not a little sheepish person. However, it needs to be done only because Hashem wants it. That's the caveat here. If the person comes to this kind of boldness and strength because of his own personal ego, so brackets here. Besides the fact you don't know if he's gonna be victorious, because if he's fighting with his own power, the other side is also invested with power from Hashem. Maybe the other guy got more boldness, more chutzpah, more strength. So first of all, if you're going with Hashem's power, you know you're going to win. If you're going with your own power, first of all, you don't know if you're going to win. But more than that, that actually becomes the opposite of holiness, because you're going with ego. Ego and holiness don't exist together. Holiness, Hashem's holiness, comes in a place where there's bittul. So therefore, it can't be the right help to do the fight of fighting the cynics and fighting the opponents to Torah mitzvahs. Only when you come to the boldness and to the existence and to the strength, because Torah told you to, then the azus, then the boldness, and then the gevura, the strength, will overpower the opponent. And we could say that this is also the inner reason why the Tur, and also the Alter Rebbe in his Shulchan Aruch, brings the one who said this statement, be bold like a leopard. He said, Yehuda ben Tema. Who's Yehuda ben Tema? If we look in the inner meaning of Yehuda ben Tema, it's hinting to us where the boldness has to come from. That it has to come from a person, from a place of Yehuda ben Tema. Yehuda is from the expression of Haidah, thankfulness to Hashem. Thankfulness is admission, submission, that I received something from someone higher. It's bittul. It's not enough that bittul should just be an introduction, the beginning of the work. It has to be Yehuda ben Tema. Ben Tema means constantly saying. Tema in Aramaic is saying. This is the constant refrain, Yehuda, the submissiveness, the bittul. And then, if that is your frame of reference, you recognize that you're in bittul for Hashem, you just want to do what He wants, it's not about you, then that can be what fuels the boldness of a leopard that's used in a positive way. Because since you're standing in if you're just going to have the boldness without the backup, without it being grounded and being a product of bittul, then chas v'shalom, you could fall into literal boldness and ego. Be very careful with that. And that's why, as we said earlier, said the Rebbe, our sages tell us, don't speak boldly. You know, if you're going to naturally develop a tendency to chutzpah, to boldness, to that kind of behavior, it can go in the wrong way. It has to be a product of your constant attachment to bittul, to wanting to do what Hashem wants. And then Hashem needs strong soldiers. He needs guys that can go out there and take on the world. You're doing because Hashem says you to do it. Then you're in good hands. You'll be victorious because you're Hashem's representative, and it won't go in the wrong direction. Zion. This is the explanation in these details that we mentioned earlier about the sheep of Yaakov. First of all, his general thrust and his avodah, in other words, his possessions, which were representative of his avodah, were tzoyin, bittul. That's his default position. However, that wasn't enough. Now he needed to go and exchange and acquire other things for his arsenal, so to speak. Maidservants and camels and donkeys. Because in order to properly carry out the Avodas HaBirur in the refinement of the world, especially when engaging with the refinement that needs to be done in the context of Esav, you need to have all items at your disposal. You need to have a full toolkit, not just bittul. However, two things here. First of all, where did those other items come from? They came through Yaakov's bartering or selling his sheep. In other words, they were a product of bittul, sheep representing bittul. Two, even afterwards, when he started to sell sheep, he didn't sell his whole sheep. On the contrary, that still remained his main possession. Because even when you get out there and you fight with the world, with the concealment of the world, you need that other toolkit. You need to have that boldness. You need to have that strength of character. You have to always remember that the main item by you has to be the bittul, has to be the submissiveness to Hashem. Ches. According to this, we also understand why. Remember, we said when he sent to Esav. So first he said not about his sheep. His sheep were relegated to spot 3. First he said he has oxen and donkeys. Why? We know that factually his main item was still sheep. So why does he relegate it to 3rd place in the description? Because by saying to Esav, I have oxen and donkeys and sheep and servants and maidservants, Yaakov wanted to tell him about the zechuyos, about the merits he has, and about the great powers he's been entrusted with. And that's why he's going to be successful. And he wanted to scare Esav, that Esav shouldn't do the negative things he wanted to do. So therefore, to Esav, he didn't speak first about him being docile and buttle, because that would have been an open door for Esav to go in and overrun Yaakov like a truck, God forbid. He wanted to make Esav fearful of the fact that he too can stand up to him. So he wanted to speak to him. Yaakov first wanted to get a message to him about the strength that Yaakov has. He needs to know that Yaakov has tzoyin. That's why he doesn't omit that detail. He puts it in 3rd. He knows he means he has bittul. And on the contrary, bittul in that context is strength, because when somebody is submissive and non-existent in front of a greater power who harnesses and so to speak hijacks him, not hijacks in a negative way, but uses him to carry out their agenda, then you're blessed with the power of that higher agenda. When you have the Hashem, you're bottled to Hashem and Hashem's driving you, then it's His force that's propelling you. But it's coming from Kedusha. But still in all, he starts off by talking about the Teikev, about the strength he has. So he doesn't start off with sheep, which by its very nature is talking about bittul. This, however, is only what the other side has to hear. For yourself, a person always has to remember the truth, that the strength is actually an outcome of the bittul. And on the contrary, the main item that a Jew has should be his bittul, should be his subservience, his given overness to Hashem. Tess, says the Rebbe, the simple message from all this in our generation is, beautiful. We need to have the Seder Aveda Vayetze. We need to be going out to make the world light, to illuminate the world. However, we need beforehand to have a period of preparation of learning Torah like Yaakov did in the tents of Shem ve'Ever. In other words, pristine and holy Torah, the way it was studied throughout the generations. However, you need to come through that to the level of Ayifrei Tzaish Ma'id Ma'id, that the person becomes expansively breakthrough. In other words, to be able to fill the world v'kifshua and conquer the world. And to do that, you need to leave the tents of Torah and go into the world, into the Eretz, into the land, and illuminate the world there. And on the contrary, in our times, the main avodah is dafka by doing. We know in the time of the Gemara, Talmud Torah, learning Torah was the main thing. That's why we have, in the Gemara, it speaks about some people that would Torah, so Yom Nosei, their Torah was their entire occupation. They're not obligated to anything else, even to do mitzvahs. Today, the Shulchan Aruch says there's no such existence. We don't have a classification of people. Even people that study full-time Torah, it's not that same level of intensity and total devotion to the exclusion of anything else. It's not called Torah, so Yom Nosei. His Torah is his craft, literally, which was the Darg of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai and his friends. It was very high level. It's not even here today by a small group of Jews, by a minute group of Jews. No. Because today, in general, the Avodah is, the service of Hashem is Asiyah, doing. Particularly deeds of tzedakah, benevolence. So mainly we have to be out there. The Torah learning is a preparation to get out there, to making to Vayetze, to going out, making the world a dwelling place for Hashem through deeds of tzedakah, deeds that we do in this world. Especially in our generation, says the Rebbe, where our occupation is to look for Jews that are blungen, that are lost and stumbling in the darkness of our exile, and bring them to the shaft of light, the light of mitzvahs, and the light of Torah. And that's not so much to make from somebody who's ignorant, make him more learned, or to make from somebody who's a smaller lamdan, a smaller learner of Torah, to be somebody who's a greater learner and more knowledgeable of Torah, or to bring somebody who's a mekel b'mitzvahs, is more lenient to mitzvahs, to make him a yirei shamayim betachlis, to make him a fully God-fearing person. Those are all things within range. The Rebbe says our work today is much more radical. Today it's atzolas nefashis mamish. It's literally life-saving. Today we have the opportunity, and our work needs to be to save the nefesh, the soul of another Yid and his children to the end of generations. That they should simply remain Yidden, they should remain Jew. And they should conduct themselves, at least starting with actual deeds, the way a Yid has to conduct himself. Not he's going to be a bigger scholar, lesser scholar, more from, less from. We're talking about here about people that are possibly going to totally lose their identity for themselves and for their children, and bringing them from an identityless place to a place where they identify with their Judaism and actually do Yiddishkeit, do mitzvahs. Yud. Another point in this is important. In order that this work should be batzlacha, it needs to start with tzay, it needs to start with bittul. You have to do it because this is what Hashem wants you to do, because this is the way you fulfill the shlichus, the mission from Hashem to illuminate the darkness of Golus. When you do the avodah with bittul, so it's not limited according to your nature or according to how much excitement and gishmak you have in it. There's no difference. If you're doing it mitzad bittul, then there's no difference where the Eibishter sends you. Wherever you are, wherever divine providence has made sure that you are, and by every kind of Jew in which you come into contact, you put yourself in with all the keiches and with all your strength to establish talmidim harbe, many talmidim. Harbe means many, higher than limitations. In a way, as it says about Yaakov, Yaakov was expansively very, very wealthy. And we go with this hanocha, with this upleg, with this we go with this understanding that this given that we have to fulfill Hashem's shlichus. Then you'll be successful with all kinds of students. And then, as it says by Yaakov, if Lavan changes the deal, if he says only the spotted ones, or he said only the ones with marks by the feet, that doesn't matter. But Yoldech said all the sheep will work out to be like that. In other words, when you go because this is what Hashem wants you to do, it doesn't matter what kind of student comes to you. You know what happens? The Eibishter gives a bracha that all your student comes out proper. And more than that, as it says by Yaakov, they were more fruitful and they multiplied more than all other sheep. And you have mitose shleima, all the children work out properly. Chas v'shalom, there's nothing lacking, or there's no waywardness in any of your children or students. It seems to me, as I'm teaching this, I'm reading it out loud, the Rebbe is really saying that you may think this kind of student is not for me, but if Hashem brought you in proximity to that person, and that person's there, and you're able to learn with them, and you're the guy. So if your context is doing what Hashem wants, look, I'm going to do my best. So that was saying it will work out. You're with all your limitations, and with the drawbacks that you think you have, and perhaps the students will work out in a proper way, receiving from you what they need to receive. Just like in Yaakov, they changed the recipe, they changed the deal. It doesn't matter. So then all the sheep were born that way. Because Hashem making this all happen. If He put you here to be with these people, then it's going to work. Then that's what you need, and that's what they need. The Rabbi continues, and this prepares every Yid to the Geula Mitzvah Shlema, to the coming redemption, the true and complete redemption. But by the Geula, no Yid will be left in Galus. As it says in the Navi, V'atem to look to Echad B'nei Yisrael, you will be gathered up one by one of B'nei Yisrael, and together called God Yeshuvahena. A great congregation will come back here, B'Karev Mamish. Together, and the Rebbe quotes in R51, that Rashi, when he brings the pasuk V'atem to look to, you'll be gathered one by one. Rashi puts in commentary, says, Oiches b'yadav mamish. Hashem holds His hands, literally, ish b'mekeme, each person from his place. Amen. Kain. Tihiyah b'karev mamish.